A very good evening. Welcome. My name is Adam Penford. I'm the Artistic Director at Nottingham Playhouse. And we're here this evening to talk about a production that is on at the moment in our theatre called First Touch, and to discuss some of the issues that that production raises. I'm joined by an expert panel, each coming from different backgrounds, but with a vested interest in this subject matter. The first thing I'm going to do is ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and just tell you a brief bit about who they are and what their background is. So Nathaniel, I'm going to come to you.
Hey everybody, I'm Nathaniel Price. I'm the writer of First Touch that's currently on. It was actually Adam Penford's idea to do the play. He knew about my background in football. I used to play when I was younger. I was signed for Crystal Palace. Worked at the FA with Sue, actually, for a number of years. And then I decided that I wanted to go into writing, and then met Adam at the NFTS. So when the scandal broke about the historic sexual abuse in football, Adam came to me and asked, would I be interested? And I was like, absolutely. This was something that really touched quite close to home for me, knowing about that world and the young boys' dreams and aspirations. And so that's how I became involved.
That's great. Thank you, Nathaniel. We're glad you did. David, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is David Lean. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse within football. I certainly don't class myself as an expert, as I've been introduced as part of the expert panel, but yeah, it's nice, I suppose. Yeah, I think Nathaniel and Adam came over to see me a good few years ago now, and we wanted to sort of hear my truth, and they were very sensitive and caring, and told me their sort of plans and what their ideas were. And you know, for me, raising awareness on a different platform on the theatre stage was something that, you know, is incredible, really. So I was right behind the idea, and was lucky enough to watch the play last week, and yeah, fantastic, very powerful. So good evening, everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Dave. Nikki, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening. I'm Nikki Disney, and I'm the Dramatherapist and artist wellbeing practitioner on the piece. And I was brought in by the Playhouse, but also Nathaniel wrote a little beautiful thing that was in the script, which was like, please, well, I can't remember your exact wording, Nathaniel, but essentially it said, please look after the team in telling this story. And that essentially has been what my job has been, to think about how we care for the people involved telling this story, and also how the institution cares for the people coming in to see those stories as well. So essentially my role has been about care in the production.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nikki. And finally, Sue.
Thanks, Adam. Good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Ravenlaw. I'm the head of safeguarding at the Football Association. I've been there since 2000 and been involved in the work the FA does in safeguarding since that time, since November 2016 and beyond, when people like David, who'd actually come out and told his story to the police before then. But since then, part of my role has been engaging with and supporting, putting in place the support for those with lived experience of child sexual abuse in football. I'm also a former player myself.
That's great. Thank you so much. Warm welcome to everybody. So just a few housekeeping notices for those of you tuning in. I'll ask a question of each of the panelists first of all. If you would like to ask the panelists a question, then you need to use the chat function at the bottom. There's a question session that will come through to me, and I'll ask them on your behalf. You may have spotted, but as people attending the webinar, your microphone and your camera isn't on. You can see us, we can't see you. We're also recording this because there's many people who couldn't join us this evening but would like to watch it in future, and we'll retain it as a resource. So just so you're aware of that. It's going to last about 70 minutes or something. I'll wrap up about 8:15. Given the subject matter, if anybody does need to leave the webinar at any point, please do. If you'd like to rejoin later on, that's absolutely fine. But if you wish not to do so, that is, of course, also fine. And I'd just like to signpost you to some of the resources that are on the First Touch webpage on the Nottingham Playhouse website, where you can find places that can offer support should you need it following the conversation. Great. Nathaniel, maybe the best way to start is presuming that some of the people joining us might have already seen First Touch. They might have been to Nottingham Playhouse and seen the production, but some people might not have done. Do you want to just give us a very sort of brief overview of what the play actually is? What story are you telling?
Yeah, it's set in the late 1970s, and it's about a young 17-year-old footballer who's about to embark on the most important season of his career. He's about to sign a professional contract. When an old coach comes back into his life, really throwing up repressed feelings, deep-seated feelings that then start to impact not only on his ambition to become a professional footballer, but also on the key relationships that he has in his life, his mum, his dad, his younger brother, and his girlfriend. And it's really about this young player trying to wrestle with these feelings and these emotions that have been stirred up by the return of his coach, and whether he can keep his dream on track or whether he will succumb to the overpowering sensations.
That's great, thank you. And out of interest, Nat, just to follow on from that, so beyond the story and the narrative, what did you want to explore with the play? What particular issues or themes, I guess, really interested you?
I mean, yeah, beyond the sexual abuse, obviously, which is the main thing to take from it, it's really a story about, I think, family, love, ambition, hope, triumph over adversity, really. But like also what that means, it doesn't have to be a great triumph. It can be just a small thing, which we see in the play it occurs quite late on. But I really wanted to hone in also on like the mechanics of abuse. Also, like for a lot of people who, when you think about, you know, paedophiles or sexual offenders, you think about strangers, or you think about people on the periphery of society who sort of lurk in the shadows. And this really, you know, shows us that unfortunately they can be hiding in plain sight, and usually are. And it's usually somebody that you know, and sometimes can be somebody that you would, you know, least expect. So it was important for me to also like to have that sort of message of like, you know, don't be blasé about this. This still can happen. This is still a real thing. And these are some of the ways, you know, these are some of the things that you could look out for, some of the behaviors or some of the modus operandi, I guess, of grooming, essentially.
Yeah, thank you. And David, just to sort of pick up on that, I know that when Nathaniel and I met you, you were very keen on us telling the story. We were a bit concerned. We didn't want you to feel that in some way we were exploiting anybody's stories for entertainment, but you made it very clear that you thought this story should be told. Why is that so important to you that we speak about these things?
I think because of where we're at. I mean, you know, it's taken most of us 30, 40 years to come forward, and that needs to change. That needs to come into the public, to the public eye. It was, for me, it was about, you know, there's been bits on television and radio, etc., but I've never seen anything or heard of anything on stage or in a play, or, you know, and I'm aware of how difficult it is to get people. You know, I've told people before, I've offered to do free talks locally, and there's been like 4 people in the audience because people don't want to listen to the subject matter. So putting it on stage from your guys' perspective was incredibly brave. And my story is ultimately what got him convicted in 2015, and him being convicted in 2015, then springboard, others came forward, and ultimately then the story was highlighted in November 16. So yeah, to have little bits of my story in there was very, it was hard a little bit, but it was powerful, and if anything, I was sort of privileged and honoured for it to be there as well. So yeah, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant day. I had a fantastic day with my wife, and thank you to Nottingham for that. But yeah, it's really important that it was told, and you've told it so well.
Thank you. I must admit, Nathaniel and I were very nervous the night that we knew you were coming in to watch the production. Like, you'd read the script in advance, and we'd been in touch with you the whole time. We'd had to delay the production because of COVID. It had been delayed by 2 years. But it was a bit nerve-wracking knowing you were in the audience that night. You were very gracious. Nikki, would you talk a little bit about what you do? For anybody at home who's not quite sure, yeah, what do you do? What does that role entail? And I guess directly relating that to First Touch, like tangibly, what did you do?
So I think it's quite a new role in terms of how it exists within theatre. I've been doing it for about 7 years now. And essentially, the role is designed to make sure that there's somebody who is an outside eye or an outside support mechanism to help people think about what they need in a space, to help people understand trauma responses. Because essentially, I guess what we're asking the team to do is inhabit a world night after night that exists within this these difficult conversations and these difficult themes. And what I think First Touch does beautifully, and Nathaniel's writing along with Jeff's direction, is that it ends with this touch of hope, which is beautifully done, because years ago I worked for NWG, who do a lot of sexual exploitation work, and I was youth participation, and the youth participation, the young people would always go, but I don't want to hear the bad, I want to know how it can be better and how it can get better. And I think that's a beautiful way to kind of round a story, is that it doesn't, sometimes when we speak to trauma, we sit it in a certain place, and that can feel very heavy for the actors and the stage managers that are within this night after night, but also for the audience. It's about how we can kind of go on a journey in a safe way. So we talk about things like de-rolling quite extensively, which is a space of, a lot of actors get taught really well how to get into character, but there's less conversations about, well, how do you get out of that character once you're in that space, and setting up really honest conversations in the rehearsal room. So it can be as simple as asking the team the question, what do you need to do your best work? And a lot of people go, I've never been asked that before. And a lot of it is about dispelling the myth that artists need to suffer in some way as well, because that is a massive myth that needs dispelling. And through that process, people are more able to tell the truth of the tale without it feeling that it's going to take a toll on themselves or their well-being. And also it extends out to the audience, so thinking about how the front of house teams support the audience members and giving people basic knowledge about trauma responses and what might be happening in those spaces. So that's my role in a nutshell. I'm sure there might be lots of questions because it is such a new role, I guess, within the theatre landscape.
That was really clear, thank you. I know the cast and the creative team said that they felt that your involvement was vital, actually, you know, going into rehearsal each day, that, yeah, you were a valuable resource. So.
Thank you.
Great. Just thank you for those of you posting comments in the chat. That's really good. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions you want to ask anyone on the panel, please just pop them in that Q&A function at the bottom. Sue, so the play is set in the late 70s, but what I wanted to ask you actually was, what measures are the FA taking now, or have they been taking, to sort of prevent abuse within the sport?
Thanks, Adam. You know, it's fairly well documented, both on our website. We instructed a QC to do a full review of what was in place, who might have known what when, and he did a good full chronology. So in the mid 90s, when someone like Barry Bennell and in swimming another coach were first convicted in this country, it was a shockwave to sport generally, and I know that's kind of difficult looking back to say that, you know, predominantly I think people thought that coaches were really good people who gave up their time to help in sport and in all sorts of other activities, but you know, that was a point where sport had to sit up in its entirety across the piece and say, no, that isn't always the case. There are some people who are seeking to use sport as they're seeking to use other mechanisms, other ways of accessing children to for their own ends. And I think that was a point where I was working for a different organisation to the FA and was first involved in beginning to look at policies for sport and education for sport, and there were different universities and experts at that time seeking to build the frameworks. So I joined the FA in 2000. Our first policy started in the late 90s, and from 2000 we rolled out a programme of education mandatory for all coaches to do, and obviously started to build the framework of club welfare officers at a voluntary level and across all of the leagues that we work with, the Premier League and the English Football League and all the other leagues, as well as the 50 plus county FAs who work in grassroots game, and started to build a framework that looked to have policy, education and checks as its kind of basic framework upon which we can build. So that started in the late 90s, early 2000s in earnest, and since then has built built on season. But I can honestly say, obviously, with the shocking and appalling revelations in 2016 and the sheer volume of them, that I think woke people up who didn't work in safeguarding, who worked in football, people who ran clubs, people who ran leagues, others who perhaps didn't understand that those risks might be there. For generally, people became aware, my goodness, there are risks there and we need to do more. So our work accelerated further from 2016 onwards.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, Sue, just to follow up on that, when we were reaching out, when the theatre was reaching out to football clubs or other sports clubs actually, and professional, non-professional and youth and senior, we sometimes were hitting a bit of a barrier in that when we approached people and said, oh, we've got a play about football on at the Playhouse, are there ways to work together? Initially the response would be quite positive, but when we went on to explain that actually the subject matter specifically was looking at abuse or the historic abuse within the sport, sometimes, not always, sometimes then there was a little bit of backing off. So I suppose my question is, do you think there is still a bit of a reticence of people to meet it head on, and why is that? Where's that fear, if it is there, coming from?
Sure. I think it's an ongoing education, Adam. I can't speak to the specifics that you're talking about, but I think we have come on leaps and bounds. And if I can speak to some of the work we've done since 2016, and when I say we, I also include the number of people like David, Paul Stewart, Ian Ackley, Gary Cliff, many others who've spoken out publicly have done in being able to educate, and obviously tomorrow there's a BBC documentary as well telling Andy Woodward's story. So the very different mediums to get the message across are really, really important, and I think theatre is a brilliant way to do that, but I think it's a new way for football to engage. So I wonder if maybe that combination has been, not quite sure what to do with this and how will we promote it. And I know we've got Rachel Wilkes from the Nottinghamshire FA on here, and she's been doing her utmost to promote the play to all of the clubs across the Nottinghamshire FA's jurisdiction and more widely with county DSOs, because I guess we see this as another way to help educate people about that there can be risks, and it's important to ask questions. It's important to make sure that children and young people understand that they can speak out. And the work that we've done over the last 5 years or so has been very much around raising the standards at grassroots level and at the professional game level, ensuring that at every layer of a club people understand they have huge responsibility for safeguarding. It's not just down to the club welfare officer, it's not just down to the coach. Actually, this is a whole club approach that needs to be there from from all the people who are working directly with children to the parents. And today we've launched a parent carer course, safeguarding awareness for parents and carers, in football, and that's very much focused around what's a parent's role, what is safeguarding, and it includes, grooming, and has been advised, that section's been advised by people with lived experience, so that we've made that as real as possible, what people should expect today in a football setting, the kinds of questions they should be asking to check so that parents and carers are playing that role, and what to do if they've got a concern. And that's one very hands-on thing that we feel it has been really important to introduce, and we'll be pushing that big time over the next few months to reach as many parents and carers as we can. And next, obviously, is making sure that we're engaging young people. And I think a big thing to say is that the culture has changed in society, and schools now have to teach mandatory sessions around what's a good relationship look like, and what's okay and what's not okay in a relationship, and for children as young as primary school and also in secondary school, just taking them through those development stages and understanding that there is such a thing as an abusive relationship, and what they can do, and that they can feel empowered to tackle that. I think our job in sport and in football is to amplify those messages, so that whatever context the child is in, that they're getting the same message, that it's okay to speak up. And similarly for parents to be asking more questions and supporting their young people, and checking out who people are, and not taking things on face value. And I think that's really important. That's if you like, some of the practical things and the work we're trying to do culturally to continue to keep safeguarding front and center, from grassroots clubs through to professional clubs.
Sure. Thank you, Sue. And I should say thank you for joining yourself. Thank you for supporting the play and production and being here this evening. We do appreciate that.
Thank you for inviting me.
Nathaniel, can I ask, I know that you were particularly keen with Clayton, who's the teenage footballer in the play, and the family, that you were very careful about how you created the family and how supportive and close-knit that family were. And that was for a particular kind of reason, wasn't it? Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be kind of like, a lot of the cases that you read about sexual abuse occurring, there seems to be like a stereotype that it's people on the periphery, it's kids at risk, it's who nobody cares about. And through doing all the research, all the reading, and then definitely after speaking to David, it was really like, no, these are every walks of life. This is kids that are loved, and parents would do anything for them, but yet still, this one thing, this ambition, this dream to become a professional footballer, is the tool, is the thing that is used to manipulate and groom not just the kids, but also the parents and everybody around them. And I found that, as a dramatist, that is interesting in itself to do, but I've also thought it was very important in terms of message to do, that that if Clayton did speak out, then he would probably be believed and would have that support there. But the pressure of making it on, pressure of like ruining this, not just his dream, but also the financial gain that this family would achieve. All these are different factors that come into it, prevent him from being able to speak out, as well as the personal and inner torment that he has. So I just found that was really interesting and really sort of juicy to explore.
Yeah, and David, I was conscious of, and although First Touch is about a fictional family and a fictional footballer, Nathaniel definitely lent on certain elements of your story quite heavily. Partly, I remember one particular scene where we were trying to fictionalize it, and we realized that actually you got Sue joining twice on my weapon. I don't know what that is. You're there twice. I'm just gonna hang on. There we go. There we go. Sorted. Is it right? Is it right? I think someone's logging on with your name on from another device. The question was going to be, David, what does it feel like to sort of see elements of your own life represented on stage, particularly when it's a tough subject matter like that? How did it feel sitting in the auditorium?
Yeah, it was a little bit difficult. The script has changed a little bit since I initially saw it. So, and I'd reread it just recently. So I sort of had in my mind when things might happen, and a few little things were a bit changed, a bit different. And so it was moving. It was difficult at times. It was instantly, though, you knew when certain things were said that it was my story. So it sort of picked up, homed in on it straight away. I don't really know how to answer it. It was such a powerful storyline, and Nathaniel was right what he says. I mean, my mum and dad were just incredibly loving parents. I was from a really loving family. You know, there's no sort of, I wasn't getting sent off to go and see Barry Bennell because there was no home for me or nowhere to stay, or I wasn't wanted at home. That's just couldn't be further from the truth. So no, it was really important that I think Nathaniel picked up on that. It was an important part of the play. So yeah, and that's, I think, part of the reason I'm where I am today is because I had that love around me afterwards. Although they obviously were unaware, the love never went. It was always there 24/7. So I was very fortunate in that respect.
Yeah, I think it's one element of the play that really moves the audience is how close knit the family in the play are, and that did come directly from what you spoke to us about. Nikki, there's a question here. It's quite a big question. I'd like to ask Nikki if she feels that there are any subjects that should be off limits in theatre or art, or should everything be up for discussion?
I think art always should have everything up for discussion, but in the discussion you might discover that it's off limits, but you would only discover that through discussion. So I think in a nutshell, the simple answer is everything should be popped on the table, as it were. But I think it's about how you approach those subjects and how you care for the subjects and how you care for the people whose stories you're telling, and how you care for the people who are choosing to tell their own stories. So autobiographical work needs that extra layer of care around it, and also thinking about audience responses in those moments. So thinking about, actually, if we put this on, what are the reactions going to be? What might manifest in the public eye, both in terms of what might impact people, but what might we also get social media wise coming into us, and what attacks for exploring this subject might we get as well. So I guess it's about making a robust piece of art. You can never answer everything. You can never be curious. You can only ever be curious about as many things as possible. You're not going to be able to answer everything or get it right for everybody. But I guess it's about doing as much as possible to care for people in those moments, and choosing who you bring in to tell that story as well. Because I was just thinking, we did some extra care for the 12-year-olds that are performing in this piece as well, because actually that they are not only more vulnerable in terms of that they are wonderful humans with a great family dynamic around them, but they are more vulnerable because of the story they're telling about being about a young boy who's 12 and his power and grooming affects and impacts them, and putting them in the story. How do we care for them in those spaces? So choosing who to tell the story, how to tell the story, where to tell the story, and the impact of telling the stories would be really key questions. But I think the very nature of art is important, that we don't sabotage ourselves not to be curious about whether that story should be told.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you about the two wonderful 12-year-old actors. Nathaniel, anyone who hasn't seen the play, Nathaniel's written a younger brother of Clayton called Courtney, and the role is shared by two actors. They alternate. They slightly steal the show. Very talented 12-year-olds that they are.
And the karate scenes.
Yeah, they do karate. Yeah, they do karate. And also Jeff, the director, the whole team actually have been really conscious of what you said there, Nikki, about their sort of duty of care to those younger actors, particularly given the subject matter. And, there's a key scene that actually the two young actors, they leave the stage. They literally go off into the wings, back to their dressing rooms, because it's a particularly powerful scene that they, that it was felt that they just shouldn't be around, and they weren't in the rehearsal room, and they're not during the show. They literally leave the stage. So I think but it was something we were very conscious of, our sort of responsibility that we had as the producer of this work, to protect everybody, but particularly the fact that there were two children in the play. Someone's asked here, David, whether it would be possible that such a play could be adapted for television, because it would help get David's messages across. Do you think it would work on TV? Would that be something you'd be interested in? Oh, you're on mute.
Is it directed to Nathaniel or myself?
I was directing it to you.
I'd probably direct it to Nathaniel. I think he would know the answer to that far better than me. But obviously, from my side of things, the more awareness, the better. So, it's took a long time for me to get the message across. And, I don't want to hark on about it tonight, but, the CPS and the police didn't do their jobs in 2013. And it took the law being changed for Barry Bennell to be convicted. And it took a long time. It was very hard. It was very difficult for my family and for myself. And it was difficult. It took it was a long pathway, and eventually he was convicted and things happened. So getting my story out for me personally is sort of part for my family as well. Yeah, it would be lovely if it went that far, but I'm sure Nathaniel can tell us more.
Over to you, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it working for TV. I mean, it's different to, I haven't seen the floodlights that's going to be over tomorrow, I believe. Which, I believe the whole go to adulthood. I think this is a portrayal of a slice of life, a particular time. So as says my internet's unstable. I'm not sure if I'm still here, but
we caught most of it.
I feel like
in and out, but
right. It feels like it's it deals with something different. I feel like it really encapsulates sort of like the loneliness and the isolation that is created. It's divide and conquer a lot of the tactics, and I feel that people don't know about that. People, again, sort of like me previously, would assume that it would be young people that people didn't care about, or people that were at risk and stuff. And I feel like this really does change perceptions and makes people more aware, and that can only be a good thing, I think. So yeah, I definitely see it working as a TV drama.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I've got a question here, Sue, it links to you. So what they're saying, I'll read out what they're saying. There's a bit of context. So the person says, I work in safeguarding in martial arts, and I feel that there's such a challenge with educating parents, making them sit up, but without scaring them off. Although we've been telling parents for years that they should ask more questions of their child's sports club, but they don't ask those questions. I feel the clubs could be more proactive instead, and make safeguarding the same as paying subs or collecting your kit, just something that's chatted about with parents consistently, so it just becomes the norm. For me, that's the only way culture will change. Does Sue have any thoughts?
Great question. Well, I guess initially, I absolutely agree that clubs need to play their part in this process. And in leading into developing this short, it's a 30-minute e-learning course that's bespoke for the parent role. We actually did some insight work as part of the process before we actually started developing the online course. And we went out to 500-600 parents, some of whom are known to the FA and sometimes respond to our surveys, who've opted in through our customer relations system, and some of whom aren't and don't really get regular messages from the FA. But what was interesting is part of the insight that came back from them was, look, if my child's coach asked me to do this, I'd see that as, I'd really get that. And if my child's club asked me, I do it. I think it's really important. If the FA and the county FA asked us, yeah, we do it, but there's this more distance between us, so that this sense that if the local club that they have this interaction with do encourage them to do the course, that they would do it. And that was with something like 79% of those who responded to our questionnaire saying they thought, from how it sounded, that it was really important they would do it. So we had this kind of bought in sort of sense, but they told us that we needed to work with the club. So that's what we've done. We've gone out to clubs as ahead of us launching the course today to say, we're asking for your help. We've gone out to all our grassroots clubs and said, we've got this course. It's an important part of your communication with the parents that that are linked to your club, parents and carers that are linked to your club. Please promote this. We need you to do this. We'll talk directly to parents as well in all the different ways that we can, but please do this. So I think in the actual course itself, what we've tried to do is ensure that we've struck that balance, because we really agree the balance that's being referenced in the question about how do you make it attractive and not too scary. We've had, as I said, those with lived experience feeding into this course, and they've advised as well. So the script on the grooming aspect is pretty between your eyes in order to help parents understand the reality of this. There's no real way to actually to do that in a short course but it's wrapped around by kind of explaining this is what safeguarding is. We've got lots of people involved seeking to do all the right things to support your children, but there may be some people who aren't, and you need to be mindful of that. And this is your role. You do have a part to play. It's not just about dropping your child off and then going to do the shopping or whatever it might be. You really do need to interact here and play your part. And if you're not happy, don't leave your child there. If you need to be asking about what are the policies in place, who's the club welfare officer, make sure you've got their number in your phone. Ensure that you understand that if there's a concern, you can raise it, and the club should be responding in this way, and engaging with you to address that, whatever nature or level of concern. There should be an interaction around this. That may not be the full reality for every club at the moment, but that's where we need to get to. And I think that's what's really important, is that engagement and getting the parents to engage in a constructive manner, getting the clubs to understand that this is part of their way to engage with the parents, to use this course and then respond and ensure that safeguarding is an everyday topic. People are comfortable to say, hang on a minute, I'm not happy with the way that coach spoke to my son or daughter. Let's have a chat with the coach afterwards, and let's make sure the club officer knows it's not a formal complaint, but I just want them to know I wasn't happy with the way that was said. So I think we're really interested to see how this course lands, how much take up we get, what's the feedback that we get, and it's certainly not the only thing we're going to be doing. We will be then utilising the whole of next season and our Play Safe campaign in September to push the course again, but then to build on those messages. So we keep building on the messages to both parents and then, as I said earlier, to young people as well, directly in football, as well as to adult players. I'm conscious that Nathaniel's written a 17-year-old player in, and I know that the abuse that took place happened when he was younger, but we've obviously got 16 and 17-year-olds involved in the adult game in football. It's important that we, ensuring the environment is a child-friendly one from all the way through, from when kids start playing all the way through to getting into adult teams.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Speaking of 17-year-olds, there's a question here. It was something that we were talking as a panel about before we opened the webinar. So, David, this question says, do you think it's the fear of this subject matter, as in child sexual abuse, that has prevented some footballers coming out as gay? And it's referencing anyone who hasn't seen the fact that there's a 17-year-old young man has come out today as gay. And they're saying it's the same in rugby as it is in football. So do you think there's something about the historic abuse in the game and that makes players wary of actually there's some association, even though there obviously shouldn't be?
I'm not sure. I think it's just a masculine thing. I think a lot of guys wouldn't disclose childhood sexual abuse for that reason, and maybe won't come out as gay for the same reason. It's a masculine sport, football, rugby, whatever. a man's ego and his fear of what may come if he was to disclose that information. And it's a lot more than just that individual. It's their families, it's their friends, it's everything around them. So has it stopped? I think the two run side by side. I think it's just going to be as difficult for someone to come out and openly say that they're a gay footballer as it is to say that, you know, I've been sexually abused or raped, you know, by my football coach. I don't think one is any more difficult than the other. I just think it's a sad situation that we're in, and hopefully today, and that young brave lad from Blackpool has set the benchmark really for people to say, do you know what, it's time, and maybe it will make a change that we all need to see.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good on him. I think very bold and brave to do that at 17. Nathaniel, this is a question. How is it different writing for stage rather than the screen? Obviously, you mostly write for the screen up till now. What are the differences?
Screen, obviously, you can control the eye, so you can convey a lot with a look, very visual medium. Whereas obviously a stage, a look can be missed. So you have to do a lot through either big movements, choreographed movements, or through dialogue. Structurally as well, sometimes depending on what platform you're writing for on TV, you structure it to hit certain ad breaks. It's slightly different. Well, it is different in theatre, and Adam came in very useful in terms of structure, and Jeff, the director, as well for me. But yeah, it's just. But then they're very similar in the sense that each scene should, you know, have either convey drama, it should push the plot along, or it should convey character. So that, you know, they overlap. But I am more confident and more well versed in writing for screen, and that's predominantly what I do, you know. But theatre's been great, and it was like a long ambition of mine to have a play on, and to have it at the Playhouse, which is fantastic. I mean, it was like when it was delayed because of COVID, I was just so worried that it was never going to happen. And so yeah, the faith that the Playhouse showed in it's just been great. And to, as I say, like, such an important issue to be performed and for people to come and see it and have the feedback that we have had, it's been absolutely tremendous. It's been great.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time in the making, wasn't it, Nat? About 5 years. I think, didn't you searched your inbox, didn't you, to remind yourself of when we first started communicating via email on the topic? It was about 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's great.
Amazing. Sue, there's a question here which says, does Sue feel like she gets enough support from local and national government to do the work that she's trying to do?
Wow, that's a small question. Not. Thank you for that. I think that the positive thing about sport, I mentioned the early 2000s, and sport itself came together and said, hang on a minute, this is new for the sporting sector, having to deal with child sexual abuse, non-recent child sexual abuse, and ensure that we do things right and we get a framework that works across sport. And one of the brilliant things that sort of links to government is that Sport England, who is, if you like, the government's agency to support sports that are recognised and that receive government funding through Sport England, came together with the NSPCC and the organisation I worked for.
Sue just vanished. She just vanished. I don't know where she went. It was a magic trick, and it was really interesting as well. We'll try and get her back. Whilst we're looking for her, I'll just move on. That caught me off guard. Nikki, you might not be able to answer this, and if you, or I'm happy to answer it, or we could tag it. But the question is, do you think that theatres often avoid topics like this because it may mean that audience figures are lower than for other plays? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. I'm also happy to feed in as producer.
I think there potentially has been a bit of a shift post-COVID in terms of what people want to engage with, having just been through 2 years of trauma ourselves as a world, and literally having had our freedom regulated and bound in that way. So I think there is a curiosity that I have about what audiences are wanting to and willing to engage with in this new world as we come out of that space. I've never got the sense that certainly theatres that I've worked with have shied away from certain topics because of fear of audience numbers, but I don't know whether you've got a different take on that, Adam.
I think no, certainly I don't think. I think most theatres believe the power of the art form. The reason to make theatre is basically to sort of hold a mirror up to society, if you like, and to reflect ourselves back and to ask challenging questions and to make people question themselves or their views, or to put themselves in other people's shoes, the characters' shoes. So I think if you've gone into theatre as an art form, it's probably not for the money. It's probably because you're interested in that kind of thing. I do think, you know, to be completely transparent, plays such as this are maybe slightly tougher sells in terms of ticket sales than something that maybe is perceived as being a kind of more entertaining, lighter night out. I have a sort of theory on it, which is that because we discussed a lot in our programming meetings at the venue about, you know, there's quite a lot of dramas that are on at 9 p.m. on BBC or ITV that tackle quite big subjects, like, I don't know, the Hillsborough disaster is this one that came straight into my mind, for example. And I think, and they get great viewing figures. And I was like, but I think there's something about that. You're in the intimacy of your own home. You can choose to switch it off if you want to. You can choose to leave the room. You know, if you're watching it on a certain, you can pause it and pick it up again when you're ready. I do think there's something about theatre, which is a really powerful medium, that you're sat with a load of people who you've never met before, all facing the same direction in the dark, with other people who are on a screen like a cinema, they're live, coming at you. It's quite intense, I think. So I sort of get why the particular subject matters, particularly if people have lived experience or connection of those subject matters, that might feel way more intense than sitting on your own settee watching it with a cup of tea.
I think that's really clear. There's a duty of care, isn't there, in terms of making sure that people understand what it's about, so they can consent to come in and they know what to expect, but without it, and finding that balance that doesn't affect the storyline. But also I think that there is that that fear sometimes about coming to watch something and not feeling like you can pause it or leave in that way, because those feelings are much more embodied when you're witnessing. There's these wonderful things that they find in neurobiology now, that are neurons that mirror. So this idea that we have these neurons inside our brain, that when we see something, we feel it. And it's much more powerful when that's live art, I think. And there's some deep science behind that now. But there is that thing about actually how able do I feel to leave a space if it feels too much, is a really interesting one within the theatre landscape.
Yeah, it is. And when we try and say to people, you are allowed to leave if you need to, and you are allowed to return when you're ready. But I get that it's sometimes easier said than done, isn't it? If people are, you know, yeah. Sue, you're back.
Sorry about that. I had a short power cut here. That's never happened before.
Wow. Not at all.
I apologise. I think I was telling you about Sport England and what Sport England did back in the early 2000s, when sport said collectively, we need help, brought the NSPCC together, and after a task force came together in sport and we identified all the things that sport needed, we basically pulled together the opportunity to for the NSPCC to host a child protection in sport unit. So the brilliant thing about sport, and possibly different to other settings, is that there is a child protection in sport unit, which is hosted by the NSPCC, has experts and people who are there to work with governing bodies, such as martial arts and cricket and rugby and football, and have provided a framework for sport to work with. So there's a set of national standards in sport that the FA and other sports have to meet if they're accessing public funding, for instance. And in theory, and I'm sure it happens in practice, if a sport doesn't meet those standards, then some money can be taken away. So to answer the question, which I think was about local and national government, we've through national government, through Sport England, in sport, we have this great framework, and it's a great place to start. It provides a sort of consistent framework across sport to which we're all working. So we know that children don't just play one sport or activity, they're involved in lots. So in theory, they should be, coming to sport and having a similar experience in terms of the standards. In terms of national government, we've just had the position of trust legislation come through, and that's really important. And what that means is, if you're working in schools, it's illegal to have a sexual relationship with a child in that school age 16 and 17. It's obviously illegal under 16. And so that, if you like, that principle is something we've applied in football for many years against our regulations, but the legislation has just got royal assent and will be enacted in sport and in religion. And this is as a result, obviously, of all of the non-recent disclosures, pressure from the NSPCC and other lobbying bodies. Government and Ministry of Justice has now made this illegal. So if a coach has a relationship in a football or religious setting, it's obviously not a coach in a religious setting, but if someone is in a position of trust, then that is now illegal, and therefore they would be facing all the relevant sanctions that could flow from that. And those are really important things, and that comes from sport working together with other organisations like the NSPCC to lobby, to make change at legislative level, and then look to apply that. So are we getting enough? There's always more that we could do. However, there are some really good frameworks in place, and getting those messages across now about those changes in legislation is something that sport and religion need to do. So really important.
Thank you. Nathaniel, there's lots of things intersect in the play, and there's a question here which asks, it says that you portray the parents as one black and one white, so they're a black and white couple, black father, white mother, therefore a mixed race child, which brings up other issues to do with this subject matter. Was this based on your own input and experience, or to add volume to the story? Because it certainly did. This person enjoyed the show.
Oh, cool, thank you. Yeah, I mean, coming from an interracial couple myself, being mixed heritage, I just knew the complexity sometimes that happens, and also it sort of serves to make this unit a tighter unit. There's different pressures that they face as a family unit, and also unfortunately at that time it would have really restricted the possibilities open to young people of colour, what they could do and how they're viewed by society. So for Clayton to be a talented footballer, this was a big thing for the family as well, and it just adds an extra dimension to the weight of expectation, not only on himself but from the family as well, and the need for him to achieve. But yes, I've I didn't experience any real bad racism when I was playing in the game, but there were definitely sort of the micro aggressions and sort of like on a small scale, just things that are passed off as a joke and stuff like that, but can actually kind of chip away at you and stuff. And it can slightly make you an outsider. And I just thought, in terms of somebody who's looking to prey upon somebody, a coach who can use that to their advantage, and as Nikki says, the play really deals with power. Who has power, who doesn't have power, how they using this power, and that's one of the tools the coaches use to gain power over this young player and manipulate him essentially.
Yeah, thank you. This person doesn't have a question, but they say that they came to see the play on Saturday. It was really moving, excellent performances by the whole cast.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, not a question, more a statement, but we like the statement. Also picks out a couple of individual actors. I won't say that in case they watch this back. They're on stage at the moment, so they're not joining us live. David, just starting to look forward a little bit, Dave, like if you had a wish, what What would you want to see happen? What's your main priority? What do you think we should be focused on first and foremost?
I think first of all, I don't want Sue's job. So I definitely don't want that job. But for me, after listening to it, I've worked within leisure for a long time, doing holiday clubs, football. I've run junior sides for many, many years, etc. And everything seems to be about now it's the coaches and information to parents. And yet 70%, if not more, of the abuse is happening within the family home. So it's happening, we're giving out a letter to a parent about safeguarding who's the actual problem. So for me, it's trying to get to the children themselves. And I think we should be doing as much as physically possible to get to the children. I think the coach, the manager, people involved in the club are people who can build excellent relationships with the children. And in one arm, we're saying about the possibility of a coach being a paedophile, a sex offender, but at the same time, 99% of all coaches are wonderful, dedicated human beings who do everything they can to give a child that maybe wouldn't have the opportunity to play sport. And that's what this, we should be about. But for me, we need to be getting down to the children, making sure there's pathways in the club to disclosure, but making sure the children know how to disclose when they need to disclose. It's no good the mum and dad doing it if it's 70% of they're the problem in some cases. So that's what I'd like to see. I'd just like to see us continue to go from strength to strength. Obviously, we're moving in the right direction, but I don't want to put a dampener on the evening, but I've spoken to 3 junior football managers and assistant managers today with this sort of topic in mind tonight. And I can assure you there's still issues. There's still managers giving lifts to children without a shadow of a doubt. It's happening every weekend all over the country. So there's opportunities that are there. People within the clubs that I've spoken to today give out a letter to parents pre-season with the welfare manager's name and phone number on it. So all the parents get that. And then speaking to them today in May, not one of them has even spoken to a parent or anything about safeguarding since that letter was handed out in July. So there's so much more that could be being done to keep the profile going, to raise awareness. And I want it, I don't want to be sitting here in 10 years' time and it happening again. I think you can't take your foot off the pedal. You just got to keep going, keep looking for new ways and don't stop. And I think the issue is we need to get to the children, because ultimately the children have to feel that there is somewhere for them to go. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. That's really powerful. Sue, do you want to come respond to any of that?
Yeah, really helpful. Thanks, David. And the 2 points you raise about reaching children and also ensuring that safeguarding's talked about day in, day out in football clubs, that kind of culture is very important. So I think firstly on children, young people, absolutely, as part of our work, we needed to do parents first. The next stage is to go to children in terms of ensuring that we're talking directly to them with resources that they feel, so informed by children and young people, that they feel is actually the right way of landing messages with them. So we're working on that at the moment. And as I mentioned earlier, seeking to ensure that we are amplifying messages that they should be hearing in other settings. So, we need to take our responsibility in the football setting, but really important that we join that up with what's being taught elsewhere. I think on the kind of club welfare officers and clubs feeling confident to talk about this topic on a regular basis, that's part of our ongoing communication education with them. But we launched a Play Safe campaign last November. It's off the back of the Sheldon report last year and the strategy we launched around safeguarding in February this year. Part of what we want to do over the next 3 years is build with this messaging around play safe. And so in September, 17th and 18th of September, it'll be the second National Safeguarding Football Weekend. We'll be, again, as I say, promoting this particular course, but beyond that, we will be looking to message directly to children and young people. And we have other opportunities to do that with Anti-Bullying Week in November, and also Safer Internet Day in February as moments really to use the campaign messaging and to tackle issues, David, like the ones you've kind of mentioned, not just, you know, travel trips away and the environments in which abuse has been enabled in the past and currently too, but also to tackle things like the, you know, social media guidance, the guidance that needs to be in place, that parents, children, adults in a club need to be working to when working, you know, very frequently using social media to run clubs. I think that's super important as well. So those things are very much in our purview to drive going forwards, and you know, to keep building on season. So thank you for that.
This question, Sue, slightly leads on from what both you and Dave were just discussing. They say that they were very impressed by your detailed account of the safeguarding policies and procedures that the FA have put in place over the years. How is effectiveness measured? What does success look like? Yeah, absolutely. There's a range of different things, really. I think partly now because we've got proactive campaigns like the Play Safe campaign that are, if you like, a bit more of a drumbeat more regularly into clubs. We can look at how much clubs are engaging with that, who within clubs are engaging. With things like the resource for parents, we can look at uptake from that, feedback and engagement between clubs, and the feedback clubs are giving us around that as well. It's got to be a bit of a 360. But one of the things that we are also doing through our county associations, when I talk about grassroots clubs, and there's a different process in place for the professional clubs, is that there are unannounced visits into grassroots clubs. So across the country, doesn't matter where you are in the country, county FAs will be going out to training sessions. I've been out on a few myself with county FAs just to observe. And they drop into training sessions unannounced. They check who the coach is, and is the coach the person that the club has told us they are, so that we can check that they have been checked and they are trained, and that includes safeguarding and also first aid. So that they're checking that, but they also spend time with parents and coaches and people on the sidelines, and talk to children, importantly. And within that process, they're asking, asking the parents about the environment. They're asking the parents about, if they know who the club welfare officer is, if they've got the number in the phone. If they haven't, why haven't they? And to sort of action that now. They're also asking children about what kind of environment it is, and do they know the childline number, and would they know what to do if they had a concern, and who would they talk to? So that kind of proactive work to seek to engage, to help with that culture shift and check and challenge what's going on. Having been there in those environments when that's happening, coaches are kind of going, oh, you're here from the county association. Oh, brilliant. How can we help? It's great, it's great you're doing this. And the parents are like, wow, you're actually engaging and doing this. So I think it's about keeping that conversation going, making it visible, making it normal for those conversations to happen, and the counties and ourselves leading by example in that regard, to keep it going, and importantly engaging children and young people. So that's another part of the work we've been doing over the last 5.5 years, and we'll continue to do and build on that. Mm-hmm. There's a comment here which says that maybe one way forward is finding a device or a mechanism through which a child could report if they become aware that another child may be be suffering abuse, which is quite an interesting. That leads me to something else slightly different as well. So there's a question here saying that this person says, I've been aware of child on child or young person abuse. Are there any comments on safeguarding within that specific context? Yeah, I guess if anybody's been following some of the things that have been going on in schools in terms of safeguarding and the Everyone's Invited work that's been done on the website there, which was started by some former and current pupils in schools, talking about the kinds of things that are going on peer-to-peer, young person to young person, child to child, is actually hugely shocking to see some of the conduct that's been happening, and the things that children have been suffering when they've been going to a place that you would think they would be safe, in a school setting. So yeah, I think it is absolutely something that we need to ensure that we're sort of helping clubs to understand that peer on peer, not just bullying, but peer on peer child, sexual abuse is happening.
that we help clubs to understand that, and that we also include that in as we're working with children and young people, asking them how we land some of these messages in ways for different age groups, from very young people through to early teens through to late teens, how we land those messages in a way that's, you know, children and young people will feel will be heard by their peers. And that includes what to do if you feel like you're, you know, you're in that situation with another child.
Yeah, thank you. Nikki, we're in the final 5 minutes, so if anyone wants to ping any final questions, I'll try and get through as many as I can in the last 5 minutes. Nikki, this is it's more of a general step away. Are we doing enough within the theatre industry to protect the mental health of artists in general?
No. No, I think definitely starting to change, and I think people are becoming more aware of the impact. I think the old guard, that for those that speak theatre language, but the Stanislavski, that kind of go deep, bring out your soul. There's a method in that, and there's a weight in that method sometimes that can be really helpful, but what happens when we put that expectation on an artist to go to those places? What is our duty of care to tell these stories? How do we look after the people that are choosing to put themselves in that? Debunking some of the myths around the fact that artists need to suffer for that art, that artists need to do these ridiculous long hours on a regular basis, that can actually be quite difficult for nervous systems to manage. I think we're slowly starting to have these conversations, and I work for a company called Artist Wellbeing Company, and myself and another wonderful drama therapist called Lou Platt, we have seen the requests for work come through quite extensively, and there's another brilliant company called A Pause for Thought, and then there's the theatre helpline that came out about 4 years ago, where there's a bespoke free number that artists can call. So I don't think that we're doing enough, but I think we're starting to move to a place where we are having these conversations, because it all intersects with equality and equity and all of those conversations. That what happened in COVID is that we had, I think what it gifted people beautifully was have the space to speak their truth on these new platforms, and people had the space to listen, because theatre's a wonderful place, but it runs so fast, it can barely catch its tail sometimes. And I think what happened in COVID is it gave people a moment to breathe and notice, actually, is the way that we have run things before, is that the best way, or are there other ways that we could do this to allow creativity to really fly? Because pressure and stress is actually a really negative barrier to creativity sometimes. It can really impact that. So that's the longer answer.
It's good though, it makes sense. I agree with it all. I think everything you're saying there makes complete sense. Nat, what's next as a writer? Question here. What are you working on, and what do you want to work on?
Yeah, so I'm going back to TV land now. So I've got a few projects with various broadcasters. Fingers crossed, a few are about to go to be greenlit. So I'd have my own show. That's the ultimate next step for me, just to have my own show. But yeah, I'm open to theatre, Adam. Little hint, come back. But yeah, it's been absolutely blast, and you know, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, it's just my next few projects are going to be in TV.
It's where the money is. Unless you're Andrew Lloyd Webber or Cameron McIntosh. You know, you could write the next Cats. That's where the money is. David, do you mind? I'm always interested in this, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but you've been retraining, haven't you? I just think that's really interesting. I don't know if it's too personal. I think
no, it's certainly not too personal. I suppose you could say I'm proud of myself. So yeah, I'm training to become a person-centered counsellor. I needed to work and can continue to work, so I've done it through 1 day a week. So it's sort of a 4 academic year process. very close to qualifying. I have one final assignment which needs to be in by the end of May, which is coming along nicely. And I have to do 100 placement client hours, and I'm currently doing my placement hours at a rape and abuse centre in Lancashire. So I wanted to get some real sexual trauma experience of dealing with clients, if you will, that have gone through that. I mean, I've spoken to an awful lot of survivors, but not in depth like this in a one-to-one in a clinical sort of setting. So yeah, it's really exciting where it will lead, hopefully, to my own practice. I'd like that to be open in a few months' time, so we will see. I'm certainly ready for it. I've got a lot of life experience behind me. But no, it's exciting, and I'm glad I started it. It's been difficult for me because I'm certainly not academic, so it's been an extra struggle. I'm not 23 anymore, unfortunately, so that's been an extra struggle. But and obviously managing all this along the way, you know, it's not just obviously this particular play; it's been everything else. And that's caused issues as well. You know, my own family environment at times, it's been very difficult to juggle everything. But I did what I did, and you know, I'm not gonna stop doing it. So it's important that I carry on that side of thing as well. It's good for me. I get a lot of self-care from helping others. So and now, yeah, I've chose that as my career to my retirement.
It's amazing. It's just amazing. I'm so pleased. And I just want to say, David, just while we're on here, that sort of on behalf of Nathaniel and Jeff and myself and everyone at the Playhouse, all the cast, like, we really could not have done this production without your just generosity and your kindness. And like, I don't think we would have done it. I literally don't. So thank you for being so open and generous. It means a lot. We really appreciate it.
No, I honestly, you've been fantastic as well with, you know, with myself. I just felt that you were almost like the right people to speak to. You gave that back, so it was an honor, it was a privilege, and thank you. And I'm glad I've been involved. So thank you very much.
Good, thank you. We're glad to. I'm going to wrap. We're about there. I just want to read out this comment which says, it's a really brave production with a fantastic subject matter. It's so important. Thank you all for being so brave and speaking your truth. What you captured on stage with those unspoken words and the looks and the questioning expressions, it was amazing. Thank you for your honesty. And one other comment about this evening for the panel. This has been really great. It's been informative and it's been engaging. It's a really important subject matter. It makes me want to come south and see the play before it ends on Saturday. Thank you to you all. Depends how far south they've got to come, I guess. So if you haven't seen First Touch, or if you've seen it and enjoyed it and want to come back, it is running until this Saturday. And there are still tickets available. We're also exploring whether we are going to put out a digital version so that people can watch the production online digitally, which would be amazing. So watch this space for that. So thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you for your questions. It's been fantastic. And just thank you so much to David, Nathaniel, Nikki and Sue for joining us as well. Really appreciate your contribution. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you so much.